Say goodbye to the good life, second wife. Emily's words still echoed in my head 6 months later as I dug through a restaurant's dumpster behind downtown Denver. I found 2 paintbrushes someone had thrown away, still with dried acrylic on the tips. I ended up sleeping on park benches while she lived in the house I'd helped pay for 25 years. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. How did I get here? Well, let me backtrack to the day my whole world collapsed. My name is Sarah Cooper, and at 60, I never thought I'd be explaining how I went from comfortable widow to homeless woman in less than a week. But here we are, and trust me, this story gets much more interesting. Robert Hayes died on a Tuesday morning in January, clutching his coffee cup while reading the newspaper. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. We'd been together 25 years, but we never officially married. Why mess with paperwork when we're already committed, he used to say. Turns out, that paperwork would have saved my life. Emily inherited everything. Every single thing. The house where I'd hung my paintings for 2 decades, the bank accounts I'd helped build, even the car I drove to my part-time job at the art supply store. Legally, I was nothing more than a roommate who'd overstayed her welcome. You have 2 weeks, Emily announced at the funeral reception, her voice sweet as honey for the guests, but ice-cold for me. Daddy always said this house was mine, and now it legally is. I stood there in my black dress, still holding a sympathy card from someone I barely knew, watching my 36-year-old stepdaughter plan my eviction. 25 years of trying to be her mother, 25 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and school plays, reduced to a 2-week notice. The worst part? People nodded sympathetically. Emily needs time to grieve, they whispered. It's hard losing your father. Nobody mentioned that I'd lost him too. I packed my clothes, my few pieces of jewelry, and 3 paintings I'd rolled up carefully. Everything else stayed behind. Emily watched me load my ancient Honda with the satisfied smile of someone who'd finally gotten her way. Don't think you can come back, she called from the front porch. I'm changing the locks tomorrow. 6 months later, I was sleeping in my car when it finally broke down for good. $300 in my pocket, nowhere to go, and winter coming fast. That's when I learned that being 60 and homeless in America means being invisible. I'd applied for jobs, but who wants to hire a woman my age with paint under her fingernails? I tried staying in shelters, but the waiting lists were longer than my patience. So I learned to find food in dumpsters and warmth in library reading rooms. The only things I refused to sell were those 3 paintings. Call it stubborn, call it stupid, but they were the last pieces of who I used to be. I was examining those rescued paintbrushes when a shadow fell across me. Excuse me, are you Sarah Cooper? I looked up to see a well-dressed woman in her 50s, holding a leather briefcase and looking completely out of place behind a restaurant. My first thought was that Emily had sent someone to harass me further. Who's asking? I replied, clutching my small bag protectively. My name is Margaret Lewis, and I've been looking for you for months. She paused, studying my face. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Jason Miller. Jason. My cousin Jason, who'd moved to New York 15 years ago and gradually lost touch. The last I'd heard, he was doing well in some kind of investment business. Jason's dead? The words came out smaller than I intended. Margaret nodded gently. I'm sorry for your loss. He passed away 3 months ago. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. She opened her briefcase and pulled out an official-looking document. Your cousin left you everything. His entire estate. $37 million. The dumpster seemed to spin around me. $37 million. I couldn't even process that number. But there's one condition, Margaret continued, and something in her tone made my stomach clench. You have to prove you can still paint, Margaret said, watching my expression carefully. Jason's will requires you to organize an art exhibition using your own work and sell at least 1 piece within 6 months of receiving this inheritance. I stared at her, paint-stained and exhausted, wondering if this was some kind of cruel joke. You're telling me my cousin left me $37 million, but only if I can sell a painting? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Margaret pulled out a sealed envelope. He left this letter for you too. My hands shook as I opened it. Jason's familiar handwriting filled the page. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you probably think I'm crazy. But I remember that summer when we were kids, when you painted that portrait of our grandmother that was so beautiful, it made her cry. You told me then that painting was like breathing for you, necessary and natural. I never forgot that. I also never forgot how you saved my life that day at Crystal Lake. Literally and figuratively. You kept my secrets when keeping them could have cost you everything with your family. Now I'm keeping a promise I made to that brave little girl who pulled me out of the water and taught me that some people are worth believing in. I discovered what Emily did to you after Robert's death. I spent my final weeks making sure you'd have everything needed to rebuild your life and prove your worth to the world. The money is yours, but only if you believe in yourself first. Paint again, Sarah. Show the world what I've always known was there. Love, Jason. I folded the letter carefully, my throat tight with emotion. Margaret was still watching me. I need to explain why it took me so long to find you, she said gently. Jason hired a private investigator to keep track of your situation after Robert's death. When Jason became too ill to communicate directly, he instructed the investigator to continue monitoring and report to me after his passing. He was sick, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in February, just weeks after he learned about your homelessness. He spent his final 2 months revising his will and creating a comprehensive plan to help you rebuild. I thought about Jason as a 7-year-old, small for his age and scared of everything. The day he fell through the ice at Crystal Lake, I didn't hesitate. I crawled out on that frozen surface and pulled him to safety, even though I was only 9 and barely bigger than he was. The investigator documented everything Emily did, Margaret continued, pulling out another folder. Emily Hayes has been actively working to damage your reputation in the local art community since March. What do you mean? She contacted galleries, art critics, and potential buyers, spreading false information about your mental state and the quality of your work. She even hired a public relations firm to ensure you couldn't rebuild your life through art. The vindictiveness of it took my breath away. It wasn't enough for Emily to take everything Robert left behind. She wanted to destroy any chance I had of starting over. The investigator has documented emails, phone records, and financial payments. Emily paid several gallery owners and critics to refuse your work and spread rumors about your instability. I looked down at my dirty clothes, my empty stomach growling despite the emotional chaos. I haven't painted anything real in months. I don't even have supplies. That's the first thing we'll fix, Margaret said, standing up. Jason's will includes provisions for everything you'll need. Studio space, supplies, and living expenses while you prepare. But Sarah, you have to want this. The money isn't just about proving you can paint. It's about proving you remember who you are. I thought about Emily's smug face as she watched me pack my life into garbage bags. I thought about the gallery owner who'd refused to even look at my work because someone had warned him I was unstable. I thought about sleeping in my car and digging through trash for supplies. Most of all, I thought about 9-year-old me crawling across that ice to save my cousin, not because I wasn't scared, but because someone I loved needed help. When do we start? I asked. Margaret smiled for the first time since she'd found me. Right now. But first, let's get you somewhere warm and clean. You have an exhibition to plan, and we have 4 months to make it happen. As we walked toward her car, I clutched Jason's letter in my pocket. $37 million and the chance to paint again. It felt impossible. But then again, so had pulling a drowning boy from an icy lake. The only question now was whether I still had the courage I'd shown at 9 years old, and whether 4 months would be enough time to create the body of work that would change my life forever. 3 days later, I stood in what used to be Jason's Denver penthouse, trying to process the magnitude of his life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city where I'd spent 6 months invisible, and somehow that felt symbolic. He bought this place 18 months ago, Margaret explained, handing me the keys. He said he was planning to retire here eventually, to be closer to family. Family, meaning me. The thought made my chest tight with grief and gratitude. The penthouse had everything. A full art studio, with north-facing windows, professional easels, drawers full of supplies I could only dream of owning. But it was the small framed photo on the studio desk that made me sit down hard. Me at 25. Painting by the lake during a family reunion. I remembered Jason taking that picture. Remembered him saying, "You look like you belong in an art museum yourself, Sarah." I'd laughed it off then, but he'd kept the photo for 35 years. There's something else you need to understand about the timeline, Margaret said carefully. Jason didn't just happen to learn about your situation. He'd maintained contact with Robert over the years, and Robert called him in January, the day before he died. Robert called Jason? Robert was worried about what would happen to you if something happened to him. He'd been meaning to update his will for years, but kept postponing it. That phone call was Robert asking Jason to watch out for you if anything ever happened. The revelation hit me like a punch. Robert had known he needed to protect me legally, had reached out to the one family member who might help, but died before he could follow through. Jason spent February investigating your situation through the private detective. When he learned about Emily's treatment of you, he immediately consulted lawyers about changing his will. The cancer diagnosis came in late February, which accelerated his timeline. I understood now. Jason hadn't been planning my inheritance for months in advance. He'd learned about my crisis, discovered he was dying, and spent his final 6 weeks constructing an elaborate safety net disguised as an artistic challenge. I met Robert Hayes in 1999 at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I was 35, working as a part-time art instructor for their children's programs. Robert was a recently widowed engineer with a 10-year-old daughter who'd signed up for my Saturday painting class. "Emily seems artistic," I told him after the first session, watching his daughter carefully arrange her brushes in perfect lines. "Her mother was," Robert said quietly. "Cancer took her 2 years ago. Emily hasn't. She hasn't been the same." I understood. Grief changes children in ways adults struggle to recognize. Emily was precise, controlled, desperate to make everything perfect because perfection felt safe. For months, I worked with her on Saturdays, watching her create beautiful, technically excellent paintings that somehow felt empty. She had skill, but no joy, talent, but no freedom. "She likes you," Robert said one afternoon as we watched Emily pack her supplies with military precision. "She tolerates me," I corrected. "There's a difference." But Robert was lonely, and I was tired of going home to an empty apartment. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes. When he asked me to move in with him and Emily after 6 months, I said yes to that too. I thought love would be enough. I thought patience and consistency would eventually win Emily over. I thought that by giving up my own small apartment, my independence, my art teaching job to focus on being a homemaker, I was making a noble sacrifice for family. "Emily needs stability," Robert would say whenever I suggested family counseling or mentioned Emily's increasing coldness toward me. "She's been through enough changes." So I adapted. I learned to cook Robert's favorite meals and iron Emily's school clothes and attend parent-teacher conferences where Emily introduced me as my dad's friend Sarah. I packed away my easels to make room for Emily's growing collection of trophies and awards. I painted in the garage on weekends, small canvases hidden behind storage boxes because Emily complained that the smell of paint gave her headaches. "Why do you bother with that hobby stuff?" Robert asked once, finding me working on a landscape. "You're not going to make money at it, and we have plenty to keep us busy." Hobby stuff. That's what my life's passion had become in his mind. But I stayed. For 25 years, I stayed. I attended Emily's high school graduation, her college acceptance celebration, her first job promotion party. I sent birthday cards she never acknowledged, and Christmas gifts she exchanged without telling me. "She'll come around," Robert always insisted. "She just needs time." Emily never came around. If anything, she grew more subtle in her rejection, more sophisticated in her cruelty. She'd make jokes about Daddy's charity case at family gatherings, always with a sweet smile that made it sound affectionate to outsiders. When she got married at 32, I wasn't invited to help with wedding planning. When she bought her first house, Robert offered to help with the down payment without consulting me. When she had miscarriages, I sent flowers that went unacknowledged. "You're trying too hard," Robert would say. "Just give her space." But space became distance, and distance became a cold war that lasted my entire adult life. I was the woman who'd taken her mother's place in her father's bed, and nothing I did would ever change that fundamental resentment. The cruelest part? I genuinely loved Emily, even as she grew into a woman who could look right through me at family dinners. I loved the damaged little girl who'd lost her mother and never learned to trust again. Robert called Jason because he was finally ready to confront Emily's behavior, Margaret said gently. But he ran out of time. Standing in Jason's studio, surrounded by supplies worth more than I'd made in years, I finally understood what my cousin had been trying to tell me. The money wasn't just about painting. It was about remembering that I'd had value before Robert, before Emily, before I'd spent decades trying to earn love from people determined not to give it. The question was whether I could find that person again, or if she'd been buried too deep under years of careful compromise. I picked up a brush, feeling its weight in my palm. Tomorrow, I'd start painting again. Tonight, I'd mourn the life I'd lost and the time I'd wasted trying to be someone I was never meant to be. The first painting came back to me like muscle memory, too, even after months of not touching a brush. I started at dawn, working on a canvas that captured the view from my new studio windows. But instead of painting the city as it was, I painted it as I'd seen it from the ground up, from the perspective of someone society had forgotten. It was angry art, raw and honest in a way my garage paintings had never been. This wasn't hobby stuff. This was 35 years of swallowed words and suppressed dreams poured onto canvas. My phone rang while I was mixing colors for the sky. Emily's name on the screen made my stomach clench, but I answered anyway. Well, her voice dripped false sweetness. I hear you've come into some money. Hello, Emily. Don't hello Emily me. I know about the inheritance. I know about your little art project. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I kept painting, adding gray clouds that matched my mood. I didn't think about you at all. Actually, the silence on the other end told me I'd hit my mark. Emily wasn't used to being dismissed so casually. This is pathetic, you know, she continued, recovering her composure. A 60-year-old woman playing artist with her dead cousin's money. How desperate can you get? Desperate enough to succeed, I replied, adding more titanium white to lighten the clouds. Sometimes storms pass faster than you expect. You'll never pull this off. I've made sure of that. Emily's mask was slipping. No gallery in this city will touch your work. No critic will review you positively. I've spent months making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. I set down my brush and really listened to what she was saying. This wasn't just spite. This was strategic destruction, planned and executed while I was sleeping in my car. What kind of person am I, Emily? Unstable, manipulative, a woman who preys on older men and convinces them to leave her money. Sound familiar? The accusation was so absurd it made me laugh. Preys on older men? I lived with your father for 25 years and got nothing for it because Daddy finally saw through you at the end. Emily's voice turned vicious. He told me he regretted ever letting you move in, said you were suffocating him with your neediness and your desperate little paintings. The words hit like physical blows, designed to hurt and humiliate. But something had changed in me over these past few days. Maybe it was living in Jason's space, surrounded by evidence of his belief in me. Maybe it was holding a brush again and remembering who I used to be. You're lying, I said simply. Am I? Then why didn't he marry you? Why didn't he leave you anything? Why did he call Jason the day before he died asking him to watch out for you? That last detail was new information, and it actually gave me hope rather than pain. Robert had been trying to protect me, had reached out to family for help, because he knew you'd throw me out, I said, pieces falling into place. He was trying to make sure I'd have somewhere to go when you showed your true colors. I showed him what everyone else could see, Emily said coldly, that you were a leech attached to our family, taking up space and contributing nothing. I contributed everything, I said quietly. I gave up my career, my apartment, my independence, my art. I gave up everything to take care of you and your father. Nobody asked you to. You're right, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Nobody asked me to sacrifice my life for people who would never appreciate it. That was my choice. And it was a mistake. Emily went quiet, perhaps recognizing that her psychological warfare wasn't working as planned. You still can't prove you're an artist, she said finally. You still can't sell a single painting. And when you fail, everyone will know that cousin of yours wasted his money on a delusional old woman. After she hung up, I stood in the studio looking at my half-finished painting. The city spread out below, full of people going about their lives, unaware of the small drama playing out in a penthouse window. Emily was wrong about one thing. Robert had loved me, in his way. But he'd loved his daughter more, and he'd been too weak to confront her hatred of me. That weakness had cost us both dearly. But Emily was right about the challenge ahead. I had 3 months to organize an exhibition, create enough quality work to fill it, and somehow sell at least one piece despite her campaign to destroy my reputation. I picked up my brush again and added a shaft of sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. Sometimes you have to paint the hope you want to see, not just the darkness you're living through. The phone rang again. This time, it was Margaret. I've been making some calls, she said without preamble, about this reputation damage Emily's been spreading. Would you be interested in fighting back? What did you have in mind? Jason's will includes provisions for legal action against anyone who attempts to interfere with the inheritance conditions. What Emily's doing could be considered tortious interference. I thought about it, tempted by the idea of legal revenge, but something held me back. No, I said finally. I don't want to win this because I sued my way to success. I want to win because my art is good enough to stand on its own. Even if she's rigged the game against you? I looked at my painting again, at the light breaking through the darkness. Especially then. Emily spent so much energy trying to destroy me that she's forgotten I might actually be worth believing in. And if you're wrong? If her campaign has been too effective? I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but determination. Then I'll paint my way through it. Jason believed I could do this, Margaret. Maybe it's time I started believing it too. But even as I said the words, I wondered if belief would be enough to overcome 25 years of doubt and 6 months of systematic destruction. I guess I was about to find out whether talent, determination, and 3 months of focused work could overcome a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. The funeral director handed me Robert's personal effects in a small manila envelope. Wedding ring, wallet, car keys, and a folded piece of paper I'd never seen before. While Emily made arrangements with someone from the crematorium, I unfolded it in the hallway. Sarah, need to talk. Important. We'll call Jason today about protecting you if something happens to me. Should have done this years ago. R. He'd written it the morning he died, probably while I was showering. The last words Robert ever intended to say to me, and I'd never gotten to hear them. What's that? Emily appeared beside me, her eyes fixed on the paper. Nothing important, I said, folding it quickly. But Emily had inherited her father's sharp eyes. Let me see it. Emily, it's private. She snatched it from my hands before I could react, reading quickly. Her face went through several expressions. Confusion, understanding, then something that looked almost like fear. He was probably going to ask you to move out, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Was he? I asked quietly. Because that sounds like a conversation about protecting me, not removing me. Emily crumpled the note and shoved it in her purse. Doesn't matter now. He's gone, and he never made that call. But he had made the call. Margaret had confirmed that Robert contacted Jason the day before he died, asking him to watch out for me. Emily didn't know that yet, but the truth would eventually come to light. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and sympathy cards, and people who barely knew me treating me like a distant relative. Emily played the grieving daughter perfectly, accepting condolences with quiet dignity, while I stood slightly apart, unsure of my role. I'm so sorry for your loss, people would say to Emily. Then they'd notice me and add awkwardly, both of your losses. After everyone left, Emily and I sat in Robert's living room, her living room now, and pretended to sort through sympathy cards. We need to discuss practical matters, Emily said with the tone of someone who'd been planning this conversation for years. Such as? Such as your living situation. This house is mine now, Sarah, legally and completely. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it stated so bluntly still stung. I understand the law, Emily, but I was hoping we could work something out. This has been my home for 25 years, and now it's my home. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but I have my own plans for this place. What plans? Emily stood up and walked to the window, her back to me. I'm selling it. The market's good right now, and I can get top dollar. Selling? The word came out strangled. Emily, this house has so many memories. Your childhood room, the kitchen where your father and I shared so many meals, the garden we planted together. Those aren't my memories, Emily said without turning around. They're yours. And frankly, I'd prefer not to live surrounded by reminders of a relationship I never approved of. The casual cruelty of it left me speechless. She wasn't just taking the house, she was erasing 25 years of shared history. How long do I have? 2 weeks should be plenty of time to find somewhere else. 2 weeks. At 60 years old, with minimal savings and no job prospects, I had 2 weeks to rebuild my entire life. Emily, please. I know we've had our differences, but I loved your father. I love you, even if you don't believe that. Can't we find some way to work together? Emily turned around then, and the expression on her face was colder than I'd ever seen it. Love? You call what you did love? You moved into our house, took over our kitchen, rearranged our furniture, and slowly pushed me out of my own father's life. I never tried to push you out, didn't you? Every birthday dinner where you sat in my mother's chair. Every Christmas morning where you opened presents like you belonged there. Every time Daddy chose to spend time with you instead of me. The years of resentment poured out of her like poison from a wound. I realized that in Emily's mind, I hadn't just been the woman who replaced her mother. I'd been the enemy who stole her father's love. Emily, there was room for both of us in Robert's heart. No, there wasn't. And you made sure of that, didn't you? With your cooking and your cleaning and your pathetic attempts to mother me. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You got 25 years of playing house. But the game's over now. I tried one more time. What if I paid rent? I could get a job. Contribute to the household expenses. Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what skills? You haven't worked in 25 years. You have no marketable abilities, no recent experience, no references. Face it, Sarah, you're unemployable. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd sacrificed my career to be Robert's partner and Emily's would-be stepmother. Now those sacrifices had left me with nothing. Your little hobby paintings won't pay the bills either, Emily continued. Nobody wants amateur art from a desperate old woman. That night, I called Jason in New York for the first time in over a year, but the number was disconnected. I tried reaching him through old email addresses, but got no response. I didn't know he was already in the hospital, fighting pancreatic cancer and planning his will revision that would change my life. 2 weeks later, I watched from my car as strangers toured the house I'd called home. Emily had hired a real estate agent who marketed it as a charming family home ready for new memories. As if our memories had never mattered at all. The day I became officially homeless, I drove to every bank in town trying to access Robert's accounts, only to learn that my name wasn't on anything. 25 years of shared life, and legally, I'd never existed. That's when Emily's true strategy became clear. She hadn't just inherited Robert's assets, she'd inherited the power to erase me completely. No legal standing, no financial resources, no family support, and soon, no reputation in the only community where I might have rebuilt through art. I spent my first night in my car, parked outside the Denver Art Museum, staring at a building where I'd once felt at home, wondering how I'd become so invisible that my own stepdaughter could destroy my life without consequence. But I held on to those 3 paintings, rolled up in the back seat, because they were proof that I'd once been someone worth remembering, even if I was the only one who remembered. 4 months into my life on the streets, I discovered exactly how thorough Emily's destruction campaign had been. I'd finally worked up the courage to approach the Morrison Gallery with a portfolio of my work, paintings I'd hidden in a storage unit I could barely afford. Sarah Cooper? The gallery director, a thin man in his 40s, looked at me with obvious distaste. I'm afraid that won't be possible. You haven't even looked at my work. I don't need to. I've been informed by several reliable sources that your pieces are derivative and technically poor. Additionally, there are concerns about your stability. My stability. I was wearing the same clothes I'd slept in, having washed them in a gas station sink that morning. But Emily's attack on my reputation went deeper than my appearance. What sources? The director glanced around nervously. I can't reveal specifics, but let's just say someone with your best interests at heart has made it clear that you're going through a difficult time. Perhaps when you've gotten proper help? I left without another word, understanding finally that Emily hadn't just taken my home and my security. She'd systematically destroyed any possibility of me rebuilding through the one thing I'd always been good at. That night, sleeping in my car behind a 24-hour diner, I made a list of every gallery and art store in Denver. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited them all. The responses were always the same. Polite deflection, uncomfortable glances, suggestions that I seek professional help before pursuing art seriously. Emily had been busy during the 3 months since Robert's funeral, using her connections and her inheritance money to wage a campaign of character assassination. But the worst revelation came when I overheard 2 art students at the coffee shop where I sometimes sat to escape the cold. "Did you hear about that woman who's been trying to show her work around town?" one said. "Apparently she's been making threatening calls to gallery owners, claiming her stepdaughter stole her inheritance or something." "Yeah, my professor warned us about her. Said she might approach students to validate her work. Typical delusions of an aging wannabe artist." I wanted to stand up and scream that Emily was my stepdaughter, not stepmother, that I'd never threatened anyone, that my cousin really had left me millions of dollars. But who would believe a homeless woman in dirty clothes claiming to be a secret millionaire? Emily had crafted the perfect trap. She'd made me look exactly like what people expected to see. A delusional homeless woman with artistic pretensions and a tenuous grip on reality. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon in July while I was sitting in the downtown library trying to get warm. "Is this Sarah Cooper?" The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. "Yes. My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Jason Miller." I've been trying to locate you for some time. Jason. My heart clenched with fear and hope in equal measure. Is he? I'm afraid Mr. Miller passed away 3 months ago. I'm very sorry for your loss. But Ms. Cooper, there are matters regarding his estate that require your immediate attention. 3 months. Jason had been dead for 3 months while I'd been digging through trash and sleeping in my car. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I apologize for how long it's taken to find you, Margaret continued. Your last known address was the Hayes residence, and when I learned you were no longer living there, it required considerable investigation to track you down. The homeless shelter system doesn't make it easy to locate specific individuals. That explained the delay. Margaret had been searching through official channels while I'd been living invisibly on the streets. I'm calling because you're the primary beneficiary of his will. But there are conditions that must be met within 6 months of his death. We have 3 months remaining. I'm not exactly in a position to meet in an office right now. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Ms. Cooper, can you tell me where you are? I'll come to you. An hour later, I watched a sleek black sedan pull up outside the library. Margaret Lewis emerged wearing an expensive coat and carrying a leather briefcase, looking completely out of place among the homeless people and college students. She found me at a corner table, surrounded by the belongings I carried everywhere. My 3 rolled paintings, a change of clothes, and a small bag of art supplies I'd scavenged. Ms. Cooper? She sat down across from me, and I waited for the look of disgust or pity I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, she studied my face with professional assessment. You look exactly like your cousin described you, she said finally. He said you had artist's eyes, the kind that see things other people miss. Jason talked about me? Frequently, especially in his final weeks. Ms. Cooper, I need to explain something important about his will and why it took so long to locate you. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Your cousin learned about your situation in February after your father's friend called him. Jason spent his remaining time. He was battling pancreatic cancer, creating a comprehensive plan to help you. He was sick, very sick. But he was determined to ensure you had everything needed to rebuild your life. The inheritance conditions aren't arbitrary, Sarah. They're designed to give you exactly what you need to reclaim your life and prove Emily wrong. Margaret pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Jason's familiar handwriting. He wanted you to read this first. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. Jason's words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means Margaret found you and I'm gone. I know you're probably angry that I didn't reach out directly, but I was hospitalized for most of my final months and couldn't risk Emily discovering my plans before everything was legally secured. I hired investigators to document your situation and Emily's sabotage campaign. I know about the homelessness, about the systematic destruction of your reputation, about Emily's cruelty. I'm furious that I couldn't help sooner, but now I can give you everything you need to fight back. This inheritance isn't charity, Sarah. It's recognition of your worth and your talent. Show them who you really are. I looked up at Margaret through my tears. $37 million? Plus property holdings and a fully equipped art studio in his Denver penthouse. But you have to organize an exhibition and sell at least one piece within the next 3 months. 3 months to create enough quality artwork for an exhibition. 3 months to overcome 6 months of systematic reputation destruction. 3 months to prove that the homeless woman everyone dismissed was actually worth believing in. I looked down at my 3 rolled paintings, the only things I'd saved from my old life. They weren't great work. They were tentative, safe, created by someone afraid to take up too much space. But they were a beginning. I'll do it, I said. Margaret nodded as if she'd never doubted it. Jason said you would. He also said to tell you that saving his life at Crystal Lake wasn't the only debt he owed you. Apparently, you taught him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. As we walked out of the library together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. Emily thought she'd destroyed me completely, but she'd forgotten that I was the same person who'd crawled across thin ice to save a drowning child. Some courage never really disappears. It just goes underground, waiting for the right moment to surface again. The question was whether I could find that courage again and create something extraordinary in just 3 months. The first week in Jason's penthouse was like learning to breathe again after holding my breath for 6 months. I woke up each morning in an actual bed, showered in a bathroom with endless hot water, and stood before easels that cost more than my car had been worth. But when I picked up that first brush, my hand shook. It's just canvas, I told myself, staring at the blank white surface. You've done this 1,000 times. Except I hadn't. Not really. For 25 years, I'd painted safe little landscapes and still lifes. Pieces designed not to offend or challenge anyone. Robert's taste ran toward hotel art. Pretty, inoffensive, forgettable. Emily had made it clear that anything too bold or emotional was showing off. Now I had unlimited supplies and no one to please but myself. The freedom was terrifying. I started with color, not because I had a plan, but because color had always been my language before I learned to speak Robert's and Emily's version of art. Deep purples that reminded me of bruises, angry reds that tasted like betrayal, blues so dark they felt like drowning. The painting that emerged wasn't pretty. It was raw, honest, painful, a woman falling through darkness, reaching for light that might or might not be there. When I stepped back after 6 hours of work, I realized I'd painted my own face. Now that's interesting, said a voice behind me. I spun around to find Margaret standing in the studio doorway, studying my work with professional interest. I'm sorry for startling you, she said. I called, but you didn't answer. I wanted to check on your progress and share some updates from Jason's investigator. I looked at the painting again, suddenly self-conscious. It's not very commercial. Commercial? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Sarah, this isn't about creating commercial art. This is about proving you're an artist, and what I'm looking at here is absolutely art. She walked closer to the canvas, studying the brushwork. There's pain here, but also strength. This woman is falling, but she's not giving up. She's fighting. You mentioned updates from the investigator? Margaret pulled out a tablet. Jason's detective continued monitoring Emily's activities after his death, as instructed. We now have comprehensive documentation of her campaign against your reputation. She showed me screenshots of social media posts, email chains, and recorded phone conversations. Emily contacting gallery owners with concerns about my mental health. Emily spreading rumors at art community events about my instability. Emily using her social connections to systematically poison opinions about me before I could even approach potential venues. This is more sophisticated than I thought, I said, scrolling through the evidence. Emily's been methodical. She leveraged her social network, her father's reputation, and her inheritance money to create a coordinated whisper campaign. No direct bribes, just influence and manipulation. Over the next month, I painted like someone possessed. Each canvas became a chapter in my story of survival. I painted my hands digging through garbage, elevated to something almost sacred by the quality of light and the dignity I gave the gesture. I painted Emily's face, but transformed it into a study of how beauty can mask cruelty. I painted Jason as a child, pulling him from that icy lake, but made it symbolic. One person saving another from drowning in more than just water. These are extraordinary, Margaret said during her weekly visit. But Sarah, you'll need at least 12 pieces for a proper exhibition, and we need to solve the gallery problem. Every gallery in Denver has been told I'm unstable. Emily's been very thorough. Margaret smiled, and there was something almost predatory in her expression. That's where Jason's planning gets interesting. He didn't just leave you money for supplies. He researched alternative exhibition strategies. She pulled out another folder. The Rossetti Arts Collective. Isabella Rossetti has been running independent galleries for 30 years. She's known for giving chances to overlooked artists. And she hasn't been influenced by Emily's campaign because she operates outside the traditional Denver art establishment. I felt a flutter of hope. You think she'd be interested? I think she'd be very interested in an artist with a compelling story and undeniable talent. Jason left specific instructions about approaching her when you had enough work to show. The irony was perfect. While Emily had been poisoning the established art world against me, Jason had been researching the independent scene where reputation mattered less than talent. When should we contact her? Give yourself 2 more months to complete the series. You need at least 12 strong pieces to make a real impact. I nodded, feeling the timeline pressure, but also the excitement of having a concrete plan. Emily had tried to destroy my reputation in the traditional art world, but there were other paths to success. That evening, I started my 6th painting, a self-portrait of a woman rebuilding herself one brushstroke at a time. In the background, shadows of her former life faded away while new light emerged from the work itself. 3 months to prove that talent could triumph over sabotage. 3 months to honor Jason's belief in me. 3 months to transform a lifetime of suppressed creativity into something the world couldn't ignore. I picked up my brush and lost myself in the work, finally understanding that this wasn't just about meeting Jason's conditions. This was about becoming the artist I'd always been meant to be. 2 months into my artistic resurrection, I had 8 paintings completed and was working on my 9th when my phone rang. Emily's name on the screen made my stomach clench, but I was feeling strong enough to answer. "I know about the inheritance," she said without preamble. "Hello to you too, Emily. Don't play games with me. $37 million? Really, Sarah? Did you seduce your cousin too, or just convince him you were a starving artist worthy of charity?" I kept painting, adding blue highlights to a canvas that showed hands emerging from darkness, reaching toward light. "Jason left me money because he believed in my talent, something you wouldn't understand." "Talent?" Emily's laugh was sharp and bitter. "I've seen your little garage paintings, remember? Hobby-level landscapes that wouldn't sell at a flea market." "You're right," I said calmly. "Those paintings were terrible, but that's because I was trying to paint what I thought people wanted to see instead of what I needed to say." The admission seemed to throw Emily off balance. She'd expected me to defend my old work, not acknowledge its weaknesses. "Well, it doesn't matter now," she recovered. "I've already spoken to several lawyers about contesting the will. There are lots of ways to challenge inheritances when the circumstances are suspicious." "You can try," I said, switching to a smaller brush for detail work. "But Jason was very much in his right mind when he made his will. Margaret has all the medical records proving his competency. We'll see about that. In the meantime, I've made sure your little art exhibition will be a disaster. Do you really think people will suddenly forget everything they've heard about you just because you have money now?" That was when I understood Emily's real fear. It wasn't the money itself. She had plenty from selling Robert's house and his life insurance. It was the possibility that I might actually succeed, might prove that I was worth more than she'd spent years claiming. "Emily, I need to ask you something," I said, setting down my brush. "Why do you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you besides love your father and try to be your family?" The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "You want to know?" Emily's voice when she spoke again was quiet, almost vulnerable. "You want to know what you did?" "Yes. You replaced my mother like she never existed. You moved into her house, slept in her bed, used her dishes, and acted like you belonged there. You erased her." The pain in her voice was real, and for a moment, I felt the old, familiar guilt. "Emily, I never tried to replace your mother. I knew I couldn't. I just tried to love you both the best I could. By taking over everything. By making Daddy forget about her. Your father never forgot your mother. He talked about her constantly, especially in the early years. Not after you convinced him to put away her pictures." I stopped painting. "What pictures?" "Her wedding photo that used to be on his dresser. The family portrait from my 5th birthday. The picture of her holding me as a baby. They all disappeared after you moved in." My chest tightened with understanding. "Emily, I never asked your father to put away your mother's pictures. That was his decision. I told him it was important to keep her memory alive for you." "You're lying." "I'm not. Emily, those pictures didn't disappear. Your father kept them in his desk drawer in his office. Sometimes I'd find him looking at them when he thought no one was watching. He missed her terribly, but he was trying to be strong for you." Another long silence. "That's not true." "It is true. He didn't put them away because of me. He put them away because looking at them made him cry, and he didn't want you to see him break down." I could hear Emily breathing on the other end of the line, processing this information that challenged 25 years of resentment. "If that's true, then why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were 10 years old and grieving, and your father asked me not to. He was afraid it would make you worry about him too. So you let me think you'd made him forget her. I let you think whatever you needed to think to feel safe. Emily, I was never your enemy. I was just a woman who loved your father and wanted to help take care of his daughter." Emily was crying now, quiet sobs that broke my heart. "I wasted so much time hating you. You were protecting your mother's memory. That's not hate, Emily, that's love. But I hurt you. I threw you out when Daddy died. I spent months poisoning people against you. I tried to destroy any chance you had of rebuilding your life. Yes, you did. And you're not going to forgive me, are you?" I thought about that question while looking at my paintings, all the anger and pain and determination I'd poured onto canvas over the past 2 months. "Emily, forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's about deciding not to let that hurt define the rest of your life." "What does that mean?" "It means I understand why you did what you did. and I hope someday you'll understand why I have to succeed anyway. After Emily hung up, I stood in the studio surrounded by my work, feeling something shift inside me. The paintings were no longer just about proving my talent or claiming my inheritance. They were about proving that people could survive the worst kinds of betrayal and still choose to create something beautiful. I picked up my brush and started a new canvas, a portrait of a young girl holding a photograph of her mother, while an older woman watched from the shadows, not with jealousy, but with protective love. Some stories needed to be told truthfully, even when the truth was complicated. But later that evening, Margaret called with concerning news. "Emily's hired Jonathan Crawford," she said grimly. "Who's Jonathan Crawford?" "One of the best inheritance attorneys in Colorado. He's expensive, which suggests Emily is serious about this challenge." Suddenly, my 3 months of painting felt like borrowed time that might be running out faster than I'd thought. 6 weeks before my planned exhibition opening, everything started falling apart. The first sign of trouble came when Margaret called with an update from the legal front. "Crawford's filed preliminary motions questioning Jason's mental competency," she said grimly. "He's claiming that leaving such a large inheritance to a distant relative with specific artistic conditions suggests diminished capacity. Can he prove that? He doesn't need to prove it. He just needs to create enough doubt to delay the inheritance distribution. And Sarah, if the courts freeze the assets before you meet the exhibition requirement, I forfeit everything." I sank into a chair in Jason's studio, surrounded by 10 completed paintings that might become meaningless if Emily's legal strategy succeeded. Crawford's strategy is delay tactics. He's betting that you can't meet the 6-month deadline if he ties up the inheritance in court proceedings. I looked at my paintings, thinking about all the work, all the emotional excavation, all the hope I'd poured into them. How long could this legal challenge take? Months, possibly years if Emily's willing to keep paying legal fees. That afternoon, I called Isabella Rossetti at the Arts Collective, hoping to accelerate my timeline. "Miss Cooper," Isabella's warm voice came through the phone. "Margaret Lewis spoke to me about your work. I'd very much like to see what you've created. I have 10 pieces completed, but I was hoping to finish 12 before approaching galleries. 10 strong pieces are better than 12 mediocre ones. Would you be available to show me your work tomorrow?" The Rossetti Arts Collective occupied a converted warehouse in Denver's emerging arts district. Isabella Rossetti turned out to be a sophisticated woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Show me," she said simply, after the introductions were over. I'd brought slides of all 10 paintings, my hands shaking slightly as I set up the projector. Isabella studied each image in silence, occasionally asking me to go back to a previous piece or hold on a particular detail. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment. "These are not the paintings of someone who's mentally unstable," she said finally. "These are the paintings of someone who's been through hell and decided to document the journey with unflinching honesty. Does that mean? It means I want to offer you a solo exhibition in my main gallery space. But Sarah, I need to be honest about something. I've heard the rumors about your mental state, your instability, your supposed delusions about inherited money." My heart sank. Even Isabella had been influenced by Emily's campaign. "But I've also seen your paintings," she continued. "And great art doesn't lie. Whatever your circumstances, whatever your personal struggles, you've created something powerful here. That's what matters in my gallery." We spent the next hour discussing logistics. Isabella wanted to schedule the opening for 5 weeks from that day, giving me time to complete 2 more pieces to round out the series. "There is one condition," she said as we finalized the arrangements. "I want you to include a piece about the experience of being homeless. Not as exploitation, but as testimony. The art world needs to see what happens when we dismiss people based on their circumstances rather than their talent." That evening, I started my 11th painting, a self-portrait of a woman digging through garbage, but painted with the same reverence and dignity that classical artists brought to religious subjects. The piece asked a simple question: what makes one person's struggle worthy of art and another's worthy only of scorn? I was adding final details when Margaret called with more legal updates. "Crawford's getting more aggressive. He's filed for an emergency hearing to freeze all inheritance assets pending a full competency investigation." "When?" 2 weeks from now. "Sarah, if he succeeds, you won't legally be able to access any of Jason's money, including what you've already spent on supplies and living expenses." "What does that mean?" "It means you could be charged with spending money from a fraudulent inheritance. You'd be in legal jeopardy just for living in Jason's penthouse." I looked around the studio that had become my salvation, at the supplies that had made my artistic resurrection possible. Emily wasn't just trying to take away my future. She was trying to criminalize my present. There's something else, Margaret continued. Crawford's investigator has been asking questions around town about your relationship with Jason. They're trying to build a case that you somehow manipulated him into changing his will. But Jason and I barely spoke for years before he died. That's what makes their case weak. But they're suggesting that your desperate circumstances somehow influenced his decision-making, that he felt guilty about your situation and made an irrational financial decision. I thought about Jason's letter, about his promise to watch out for me, about his knowledge of Emily's sabotage campaign. His care for me hadn't been manipulation. It had been love. But would a judge see it that way? How strong is their case? Not very strong on facts, but Crawford's good at creating doubt. And in inheritance law, sometimes doubt is all you need to tie up assets for years. Years. I had 5 weeks until my exhibition opening, and if Emily succeeded in freezing the inheritance, I might not legally be able to claim success, even if I sold every painting. Margaret, what happens if they freeze the assets before the exhibition? Then you forfeit everything, and the money goes to charity, as specified in Jason's will. I hung up and stared at my paintings, thinking about Emily's strategy. She couldn't win outright, but she could delay long enough to make me lose. She was betting that I'd run out of time before I could overcome her legal obstacles. But Emily had forgotten something important about me. I was the same person who'd crawled across thin ice to save a drowning child, not because I wasn't afraid, but because someone I loved was in trouble. Jason was counting on me, and I'd never let him down before. The question was whether 5 weeks would be enough time to prove that talent could triumph over vengeance, and that some promises are worth keeping no matter what they cost. I picked up my brush and started my 12th painting, a portrait of 2 cousins, one pulling the other from dark water into light, their hands connected across time and death by unbreakable love. The night before my exhibition opening, I stood in Isabella's gallery, surrounded by 12 paintings that told the story of my fall and resurrection. Tomorrow, after months of legal battles and Emily's sabotage, the art world would finally see what I'd been trying to create for 60 years. That's when my phone rang with the call I'd been dreading. "Sarah, it's Margaret. We have news from the courthouse." "How bad?" "Actually, it's good news. Crawford's emergency motion was denied. The judge ruled that Jason's mental competency was well documented by his medical team, and that the inheritance conditions show rational planning, not diminished capacity." I sank into a chair, relief flooding through me. Emily lost? Her legal challenge failed completely. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Crawford's argument that giving money to family members is proof of mental illness. Jason's medical records show he was competent right up until his death. So the inheritance is secure? Completely secure. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. Emily was in the courtroom today. My stomach clenched. What did she do? Nothing dramatic. She just sat in the back and listened to Crawford's arguments get systematically dismantled. When the judge denied the motion, she got up and left without speaking to anyone. I looked at my paintings, thinking about Emily, hearing legal experts confirm that Jason had been rational and competent when he chose to help me. Had it finally occurred to her that maybe, just maybe, I was worth believing in? "The exhibition can proceed as planned," Margaret continued. "You've met all of Jason's conditions. Tomorrow is just confirmation." At exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, Isabella unlocked the gallery doors. The first person through was Margaret, wearing a proud smile and carrying white roses. Behind her came people I didn't recognize, sophisticated art world types who moved through the gallery with practiced assessment. I watched nervously as they examined my work, trying to read their expressions. The painting of myself digging through garbage drew particular attention, as did the portrait of hands reaching through darkness toward light. "Excuse me, are you the artist?" I turned to find a well-dressed woman in her 40s studying me with curious eyes. "Yes, I'm Sarah Cooper. I'm Dr. Amanda Foster from the University of Colorado Art Department. I wanted to tell you that your work is extraordinary. The emotional depth, the technical skill, the raw honesty. It's exactly what contemporary art should be." "Thank you. I'm particularly interested in this piece," she said, gesturing toward my self-portrait as a homeless woman. "The way you've elevated a moment of degradation into something almost sacred, it reminds me of Caravaggio's religious paintings." Other people began gathering around us, drawn by Dr. Foster's enthusiastic commentary. I found myself explaining my techniques, my inspiration, my journey from homelessness to this moment of recognition. As the evening progressed, I noticed red dots appearing next to several paintings. Sales, actual sales, to people who wanted to own pieces of my story because they recognized its value. By 8 o'clock, 6 paintings had sold for a total of $58,000. I'd not only met Jason's condition of selling one piece, I'd exceeded it beyond my wildest dreams. That's when I saw her in the crowd. Emily, standing quietly in the corner, studying the painting I'd made of her father's hands holding a paintbrush, my memorial to Robert's support of my art, however imperfect it had been. I walked over to join her. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The painting of Daddy's hands. I remember him trying to paint with you sometimes in the garage." "He wasn't very good at it," I said with a small smile. "But he tried." "He loved you," Emily said. "I fought against that love for 25 years. But it was real." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching people admire the paintings that had grown from so much pain. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," Emily said finally. "Something I should have told you years ago." "What?" "I found Daddy's papers when I was cleaning out his office. Records of payments he made to private investigators. For 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, he hired people to keep track of Jason in New York." I stared at her. "Why would he do that?" "Because you missed Jason. Because you used to wonder aloud what had happened to him. Whether he was safe, whether he was happy. Daddy hired investigators to make sure Jason was okay, because he knew you worried." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Robert had spent thousands of dollars over 10 years keeping tabs on my cousin because he'd seen how much I cared about Jason's well-being. The investigators' final report from 2020 included a note that Jason had hired his own detective to keep tabs on you. You'd both been watching out for each other through intermediaries for years without knowing it. The beautiful symmetry of it made my eyes fill with tears. Jason and I, loving each other across distance and silence, both too proud to reach out directly, but too caring to let go completely. "There's more," Emily continued. "The investigators' reports show that Jason contacted his estate lawyer the day after Daddy called him in January. He'd been planning the inheritance conditions for months, Sarah, but only after he learned about your situation. He knew I'd need help. He knew you'd need more than money. He knew you'd need a reason to believe in yourself again." Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The exhibition requirement wasn't about proving you could paint. It was about giving you permission to be the artist you'd always been." At 9 o'clock, Isabella announced the final sales tally. 8 of my 12 paintings had sold for a total of $76,000. I'd not only met Jason's conditions, I'd proven that my art had genuine commercial and critical value. As the crowd began to thin, I found myself standing before the painting of myself, falling through darkness, reaching for light. A small woman approached me, probably in her 70s, wearing a simple blue dress. "Excuse me, dear. Are you the artist?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Dorothy Chen. I've been following your story in the papers." She paused, studying the painting. "I lost my home last year when my family decided I needed assisted care. I've been feeling like my life was over." She pointed to the reaching hand in my painting. "But looking at this, seeing what you've accomplished after losing everything, it gives me hope that maybe my story isn't finished either." Dorothy Chen bought the painting of myself, falling toward light. And as I watched her sign the purchase agreement, I realized I'd finally understood Jason's true gift to me. The inheritance was just confirmation of what Jason had always known. Some people are worth believing in, especially when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. 6 months after my exhibition opening, I stood in the conference room of what would soon become the Jason Miller Foundation for Displaced Artists. The space buzzed with contractors installing new lighting and art supplies arriving by the box. The inheritance had been officially transferred, all legal challenges resolved. Emily had withdrawn her contest completely after seeing my exhibition's success, finally understanding that Jason's faith in me had been justified. But the real victory wasn't the money, or even the artistic recognition. It was the letter I'd received 3 days after the gallery opening, forwarded by Margaret from Emily's lawyer. "Sarah," it began, "I've spent the last week thinking about our conversation at your exhibition, about the painting of Daddy's hands, about everything I learned from the court case about Jason's careful planning to help you. I realize now that I've been fighting the wrong battle for 25 years. I wasn't protecting my mother's memory by hating you. I was dishonoring it. My mother would have wanted Daddy to be happy. She would have wanted me to be kind to the woman who loved him. I can't undo what I've done, But I can stop making it worse. I'm withdrawing all legal challenges to Jason's will. More than that, I want to help with whatever you're planning to do with the inheritance, if you'll let me." Emily had appeared at my penthouse door 2 days later, nervous and uncertain, carrying a manila envelope. "These are yours," she said, handing me the envelope. "Daddy's pictures of my mother, the ones from his desk drawer. You should have them." Inside were dozens of photographs. Robert's first wife laughing at their wedding, holding baby Emily, teaching her to ride a bike. Pictures of a woman who'd loved her family completely and would have wanted that love to continue even after she was gone. "She was beautiful," I said, studying a photo of Emily's mother painting with 5-year-old Emily. "You look just like her." "I want to be like her too," Emily said quietly. "She was kind. She would never have thrown someone out of their home or tried to destroy their reputation. I became someone she wouldn't recognize. That's when Emily made an offer that changed everything." "I want to help fund the foundation," she said. "I want to use Daddy's inheritance and the money from selling the house to help other people who've been displaced like you were. It's what both of our parents would have wanted." Now, 6 months later, Emily served as co-director of the Jason Miller Foundation. She'd proven to be as methodical in helping people as she'd once been in trying to destroy me. Her organizational skills and business connections had been invaluable in getting the foundation off the ground. "The first cohort of artists arrives next week," Emily said, reviewing applications at the conference table. 12 people who've lost housing due to family disputes, medical bills, or economic hardship. Each will get a fully equipped studio space and 6 months of support to rebuild their artistic practice. I looked through the applications. A 70-year-old sculptor whose children had forced him into assisted living against his will. A painter who'd lost her apartment after her husband's medical bills consumed their savings. A photographer whose family had disowned him for being gay. "All of them remind me of someone," I said with a smile. "They remind me of all of us," Emily replied. "People who lost their support systems, but never lost their talent." The foundation's main studio space occupied the entire ground floor of a converted warehouse. 12 individual work areas, each equipped with professional supplies, surrounded a central common area where artists could collaborate and support each other. "The most important thing," I told each new cohort, "is that this isn't charity. This is recognition. You're here because you're artists who deserve space and support to create. The displacement that brought you here doesn't define your worth. Your art does." Margaret had helped structure the foundation to be sustainable. The inheritance income, combined with Emily's contributions and growing private donations, would allow us to help 48 artists per year indefinitely. But the true measure of success wasn't in numbers. It was in the art being created. Marcus, the 70-year-old sculptor, had spent his first month creating pieces about dignity in aging that challenged everything society believed about elderly worth. Sarah J., the painter dealing with medical debt, had channeled her anger at the healthcare system into canvases that made viewers feel the desperation of choosing between medication and rent. "You've given them more than studio space," Isabella Rossetti told me during a visit to the foundation. "You've given them permission to turn their pain into power." My own art had continued evolving. The paintings from my original exhibition now hung in galleries across Colorado, with a traveling show scheduled for next year. But the work I was most proud of was newer. Paintings that documented not just survival, but transformation. Art that showed what happened when people believed in each other's potential for resurrection. On the first anniversary of Jason's death, I stood in his old penthouse, now the foundation's administrative offices, holding his final letter. "Some people are worth believing in," I read aloud to the empty room, "especially when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves." Jason had saved my life twice, once from that icy lake when we were children, and once from the deeper drowning of despair and purposelessness. Both times he'd done it not because I'd asked for help, but because he'd seen something in me worth preserving. Now the foundation was doing the same thing for others, seeing potential where society saw problems, recognizing talent where families saw burdens, offering hope where the world offered dismissal. That evening, I called Emily to confirm plans for the next day's foundation board meeting. "Any regrets?" I asked her. A question that had become our ritual check-in. "Only that it took me so long to realize that love isn't finite," she replied. "Daddy loving you never meant he loved me less, and helping you succeed doesn't diminish my worth." "What about you?" she asked. "Any regrets?" I looked around Jason's studio. now filled with paintings from current foundation artists, works in progress that represented dreams being rebuilt and talents being reclaimed. Just one, I said. I regret that Jason didn't live to see what his faith in me made possible. I think he knew, Emily said softly. I think that's why he structured everything the way he did. He knew you'd use the inheritance to help other people, just like you helped him when you were kids. Outside my window, Denver spread out in all directions, full of people going about their lives, unaware of the small revolution happening in a converted warehouse, where artists who'd been written off by society were proving their worth one brushstroke at a time. The inheritance conditions hadn't really been about proving I could paint. They'd been about proving that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. And sometimes, the person you were always meant to be is someone who helps other people remember who they are too. The Jason Miller Foundation's motto, painted on the wall of our main studio, came from Jason's final letter. Some people are worth believing in, especially when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. Every day, I watched artists who thought their stories were over discover that they were actually just beginning a new chapter. And every day I remembered that the best art comes not from avoiding pain, but from transforming it into something beautiful enough to light the way for others walking through their own darkness. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.